A very good afternoon to all my students here. Well, as discussed in the overview yesterday, we would be starting on the block 1, which comprises of the 18th century novel and also has a couple of units which talks about the major authors like the Robinson Crusoe's by Daniel Defoe. And then we have Joseph Andrews by Henry Fielding. And so let us start with the novel, the actual concept of novel. What exactly? So we'll start with the first unit in block 1. Let me just share the screen with you. Right. So it is Rise of the Novel. So basically, the definition I would like to start with, it is a genre which has several other descriptions and definitions to it. So, but according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, it says that it's a sustained story, which is not historically true, but might very easily be so. So it's a kind of a fiction. So we are going to do a very brief history of the novel and its evolution, its start to a contemporary day, what it looks like, what the characteristics are, and how they've evolved over time. Now, when we talk about its origin, it was derived from the Italian novella, which means a little new thing. Yeah, here we move on to the next slide. So it's actually a long work of narrative fiction, normally written in prose form and which is typically published as a book. The term for the novel is in most European language is Roman, which suggests its closeness to the medieval romance. Here, romance, we talk about romance, it is all about the adventurous quest of kings. That was called as the romance. And the English name is derived from the Italian novella, means a little new thing. And romances and novellas, short tales in prose, were predecessors of the novel. Now, moving on to romance or chivalric romance. So it's a type of narrative in prose or verse popular in the aristocratic circles of high medieval and early modern Europe. They were marvel-filled adventures, often of a knight with heroic qualities, who carries out a quest in later romances, particularly those of French origin. There is a marked tendency to emphasize themes of courtly love. Then Italian novella. Since the 18th century, the term novella or novel in German has been used in English and other European languages to describe a long short story or a short novel. First English novel is said to be the Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe 1719, the book which is now, I think, the novel which is prescribed in our syllabus, and His Moll Flanders 1722. Well, what were the factors which were responsible for the rise of novel in the 18th century? I mean, until then, it did exist, but it didn't gain momentum as it did in 18th century. Now, what were the factors? Rise of realism. The 18th century literature was characterized by the spirit of realism. Reason, intellect, and correctness were the main characteristics of 18th century literature. It's also considered as a product of an intellectual milieu shaped by the 17th century philosophers as desk cutters, and Locke, who insisted upon the importance of individual experience. Now, here, the reading public wanted to see their lives reflected in a literary form. So, novelists like Defoe and Richardson were writing about the struggles of middle class people and using experiences that were clearly recognizable to the reading public. They represented characters in particular places and times with familiar naming. Subjects were relevant to 18th century concerns. Then another chief reason how this has gained its momentum is again the availability of printed material. So as we know, because of the invention of the printing machine, there was a lot of material which was produced, and it has become, affordable, and where every other person could, kind of get access to the written material. Now, in the 18th century, the appearance of newspapers and magazines attracted a large number of readers from the middle class. These new readers had little interest in the romances and the tragedies which had interested the upper class. Thus, the need for new type of literature that would express the new ideas of the 18th century rose, and this new type of literature was none but novel. Now, moving on to the next one is again the rise of middle class. So, an equally important element in the rise of the novel was economic. As industrialization increased, a middle class developed rapidly in England. With the increasing middle class came more education and leisure time, both ingredients in the popularity of the novel, as more people had time to read and more money to buy books. Role of women is again another important aspect in this. So in the 18th century, women of upper classes and the middle classes could not participate in the activities of men. I mean, there was still these kind of gender discrimination prevailing during that period of time. If you also remember, where, most of the writers had a pseudo pen name, they would never write or get any material published in the name of a woman, as even though it was written by women, still they had to use the name of a man to get it published, where because women were not encouraged to get into this field. So they could not engage themselves in administration, politics, hunting, drinking, etc. So hence in their leisure time, they used to read novels. Another important factor for the rise of novel is decline of drama. The decline of drama also contributed to the rise of the novel in the 18th century. In the 18th century, drama lost its fame that it had in Elizabethan age. It did not remain an influential literary form. Thus, its place was filled by the English novel after 1740. Thus, the decline of drama led to the rise of the English novel. Now, one more point I would like to add to this is the drama was a kind of a thing where people would sit and watch it. So, no matter whether the person is literate or illiterate, they would happily watch it. It was a passive act. It had nothing to do with literary aspect. So now people, as because of the printing machine and the cheap availability of the material, people started becoming literate, and they started wanted to feel the reading aspect. So they wanted to get into the habit of reading. So that's how there was a decline of drama. Then circulating libraries, another important aspect here, where circulating library is quite similar to the public libraries that we have today. People were able to borrow a limited number of books for a set length of time, and they were subject to fines if items were lost, damaged, or returned after the due date. And likewise, circulating libraries stocked wide range of items, including non-fiction, fiction, and eventually children's books. And there were a lot of coffee houses flooded with people who would come down to pick up books, read books, and there were mobile libraries and so on. Then, right. So this was something to do about the library aspect of it. And the novel, the rise of novel, origin of novel. Now, another point which I would like to take up in the next thing is Unit 1. So here I would like to talk a bit about the types of novels now which where, I mean, as per our syllabus, which are included in it, like it is adventure novel, picaresque novel, Gothic novel, and epistolary novel. Now, these are not only the four kinds, there are several others, but as per our the syllabus which is mentioned here, we're going to talk about these types of novels. Now, in coming to the adventure novel, now the adventure genre consists of books where the protagonist goes on an epic journey, either personally or geographically. Often the protagonist has a mission and faces many obstacles in this way. So I'm sure when I talk about adventure novel, I'm sure you will be reminded of Robinson Crusoe, right? So this is how he goes on an adventure, takes a journey on sea, right? Then moving on to the picaresque, which takes its name from the Spanish term picaro, which translates roughly to rogue. It is the picaro that is at the center of all picaresque novels. And it's a genre of fiction where the readers will follow the adventures of a roguish hero or heroine. These rogues normally live outside of the social norm, and although they are not criminals, they certainly do not follow society's rules. These characters usually have a certain charm about them and often have the reader's sympathy. Basically, a picaresque protagonist, if you look at the character of this kind of a genre, they are either they are low born or not of that importance, but still they kind of, get drifted, cut across through several difficulties to reach out or to kind of survive. So that's the theme of picaresque. I think when we talk about picaresque novel, which might remind us about the Joseph Andrews, Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews, which is, of course, not totally, it kind of takes it off as picaresque, but partially, yes, a few chapters does kind of connect with this kind of a picaresque kind of a genre. Right. Now, coming to the Gothic novel. Now, this genre, which is dark, eerie, and mysterious, often containing elements of terror, horror, and the macabre and the bizarre. So, the common themes and motives of the Gothic include power, confinement, isolation, and sometimes terror. It's like thriller, supernatural, doom, death, decay, old haunted buildings with ghosts, and so on. So this is something to do with Gothic novels. When you talk about the epistolary novels, uh, epistolary novel, it's also a fiction. It's a popular genre where the narrative is told via a series of documents. The word epistolary comes from Latin, where epistola means a letter. Letters are the most common basis of epistolary novels, but diary entries are also popular. Now, for this, I can quote an example. Alice Walker's The Color Purple. And then we also have Bridget Jones' diary. Right. And Samuel Richardson's Pamela and Clarissa. Right. So these were some of the types of novels. Now, when we talk about the prominent authors again, in this block 1 of your module, we have Jonathan Swift, Daniel Defoe. Of course, Daniel Defoe, this is whose life history and his works, we are going to read it now. Then coming to Samuel Richardson again. Yes, we are going to take up, well, not Samuel Richardson, of course, Henry Fielding again. So these are some of the prominent writers of this period. They are the authors of the novels. And out of all these, Daniel Defoe is considered to be the father of novel. Right. So the other novelists who've been mentioned in this chapter are Tobias Smollett, Lawrence Sterne, Horace Walpole. Yeah. So let us quickly move on to the right. Let me just share a PPT. Right. Robinson Crusoe's Daniel Defoe, Robinson Crusoe. Now, Daniel Defoe, 1630 to 1731, born as Daniel Foe, founder of English novel, and his masterpiece is Robinson Crusoe. Well, he was born into a butcher's family, son of James Foe, Othello Chandler, education from a dissenting academy, and he was an intelligence agent, prolific writer with at least 198 pen names. And then some of his works were like Captain Singleton, Moll Flanders, Colonel Jack, Roxana. Right. Then Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. At the time it was written, the public thought that it was a true story and that the events had really happened. This is because of the way that the story is written. Now, how is it similar to what we have read recently? Now, Robinson Crusoe, it's a fictional biography of the castaway who spends 28 years on a remote tropical island near Trinidad, encountering cannibals, captives, and mutinies before being rescued. Maybe I'll just give you a gist of this Robinson Crusoe. It's actually, a kind of a true story narrated in the first person of a young Englishman who, against the wishes of his parents, set sail on a dangerous sea voyage. And on his travels, Crusoe is shipwrecked several times, always resolving to set out again, until one especially dangerous journey to procure slaves from Africa when he's shipwrecked on an island off the coast of South America. Crusoe is the wreck's sole human survivor. A dog and two cats survive along with him, and grateful to be alive, he sets about making himself as comfortable as he can in his new home with provisions rescued from the ship before it sinks and survival tactics honed during previous voyages. A large section of the novel is devoted to Crusoe's journal, in which he describes his daily routine on the island, his difficulties acquiring food, and how he begins to read the scripture and find solace in Christianity. After 2 years on the island, Crusoe reflects how much more happy this life I now led was, with all its miserable circumstances, than the wicked, cursed, abominable life I led all the past part of my days. Now, slavery and British colonialism are key backdrops to the novel, informing nearly every aspect of the plot. Characters and ideas contained within. Over 20 years go by before Crusoe spots a human footprint, not his own, on the sand. It turns out to belong to a visiting cannibal, a group of whom sometimes come to the island to kill and eat prisoners they have captured at sea. Several more years pass before one of those prisoners escapes and becomes Crusoe's attendant, naming him Man Friday after the day of the week he finds him. Crusoe converts Friday to Christianity and teaches him the English language. Ultimately, after 27 years on the island, Crusoe is able to negotiate passage on an English ship which stops by. He returns home only to find he has been believed long since dead by his family and disinherited. He continues his life and travels as a colonial trader, and the book ends with the promise of narrating more of his escapades in the future. Now, these went on to be published as the Farther Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. Well, this book was instantly popular, inspiring number of responses and imitations which have continued to the present day. Its methodical and detailed structure makes it the prototype of the English realistic novel. It is still studied for its interrogation of the limits of human resilience and its treatment of ideas of civilization and brutality. In the 20th century, Robinson Crusoe was important to post-colonial and Caribbean literature. Well, uh, so here, this is again the plot summary, which I have just explained about it, where he set sail, and it was a kind of a very troubled journey, and it is a shipwrecked in a storm. And then after 2 years of slavery, he manages to escape, and then en route to Brazil, there with the help of the captain, Crusoe becomes owner of a plantation. Then again he wants to travel to Africa to bring in some slaves for his the he wants to engage a few take these Africans as slaves to bring back to his place for the work. Then he keeps a calendar by making marks in a wooden cross on the island to mark that he wants to uh, kind of make a note as to how many days he has spent there on the island. Then he also raises goats, all using tools created from stone and wood, which he harvests on the island. He also adopts a small parrot. He reads the Bible and becomes religious, thanking God for his fate, in which nothing is missing but human society. Now, this is how he discovers cannibals. From there, he meets Friday, and then the man actually, and he names him as Friday. Now, this is I can just give you a point here as enslaving, or kind of having a domination on someone over somebody, and naming him as Friday because he found that man on Friday, right? And so this is how, which was published on April 25th. Before the end of the year, this first volume had run through 4 editions. And I mean, there was a wide readership. Then he also went on to write a lesser known sequel, The Further Adventures of Robinson Crusoe. Yeah. Now, when you look at it, it's like, there is a reflection of colonialism. Robinson Crusoe is a true symbol of the British conquest. The whole Anglo-Saxon spirit is in Crusoe. Crusoe attempts to replicate his own society on the island. Application of European technology, agriculture, and even a rudimentary political hierarchy. The idealized master-servant relationship between Crusoe and Friday. Crusoe represents the enlightened European. Friday is the savage who can only be redeemed from his supposedly barbarous way of life through the assimilation into Crusoe's culture. Nevertheless, within the novel, Defoe also takes the opportunity to criticize the historic Spanish conquest of South America. Then we also see an aspect of religion, as Robinson is not a hero, but an everyman, a wanderer to become a pilgrim, building a promised land on a desolate island. Robinson becomes closer to God, not through listening to sermons in a church, but through spending time alone amongst nature with only a Bible to read. So Defoe's central concern is the Christian notion of providence. Providence is like under the guidance of a Holy Spirit or a God, right? So next, we have Henry Fielding, a novelist, a playwright, one of the founders of the English novel, the greatest novelist of the 18th century. He was born in an aristocratic family, well educated, a deep knowledge of life. In order to make a living for himself, he began to write plays and farces for the stage. Well, writing and the novels have become a commercially strong point during that period of time. People were into writing novels because of a lot of demand from the people. So that was actually their kind of a In fact, it became a kind of a business for them. Now, soon he became one of the most popular playwrights in London. Most of his dramatic works were satiric comedies. Fielding mercilessly exposed the corruption, hypocrisy, and cruelty of the officials. I mean, he was quite bold about it. And that is how he faced a lot of problems for kind of making fun of these things or making mockery about it. His plays, of course, caused fear in the government and aroused hatred of the ruling class. So in 1737, an act appeared according to which plays should be brought under direct censorship. Fielding could not write plays, so he ended his career as a playwright and took up the study of law. He was made a judge in 1748. Realized that none of his plays would ever gain the approval of Walpole's new governing body, quit the theatre and entered law school and graduated in 1740. Now began his novel writing by attacking Samuel Richardson. Published his first novel, Joseph Andrews, which is actually a parody of the best-selling novel at the time, Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded by Samuel Richardson. He had written making fun of this, making a mockery about it, the Pamela or Virtue Rewarded by Samuel Richardson, about a virtuous servant girl. Now followed by Jonathan Wild the Great, Tom Jones, his masterpiece, then Amelia was his last novel. Now in his novels, Fielding continued to expose and fight against social evils of his time. His later years were devoted to the duties as a magistrate. And his position, well, Defoe still followed the 17th century tradition of claiming his fiction was fact. Now, Richardson declared that his tales were moral tracts, emphasizing the instructional rather than the fictional aspect. But Fielding, the first major novelist to unabashedly wrote fiction. Now, Fielding is the founder of English realistic novels. He set up the theory of realism in literary creation. The exact observation and study of the real life was the basis of his work. He did not rely simply on his imagination. He did not imitate the characters depicted in the works of earlier authors. He made a close and constant study of real men and women in real life. He gave us genuine pictures of men and women of his own age. His aim as a novelist was to write comic epic in prose. So that is how the present Joseph Andrews is something like comic epic in prose. He once described himself as great tattered bard. So tattered bard is like, he's a poet who's a great poet, but in shambles. The comic epic is designed to furnish instruction as well as entertainment. Fielding believed in the educational function of the novel. So his major works, Joseph Andrews, Jonathan Wild the Great, Tom Jones, Amelia. Now, Joseph Andrews is one which we are going to take it up. And it was a first novel published in 1741. It's a parody of Richardson Pamela. The intention behind writing this was ridiculing Richardson's novel Pamela. The hero of the novel, Joseph Andrews, is none but Pamela's brother. Now, the situation is contrived by reversing the situation in Pamela. Joseph, a very handsome young man, is a male servant in Lady Booby's house. So here it goes, the brief gist of Joseph Andrews. And then Lady Booby, attracted by Joseph's charms, pursues him, but Joseph repels her temptation. Now, Lady Booby is quite angry with him and drives him away. Then Joseph goes to see his sweetheart, a country girl named Fanny. On the way, he is robbed and carried to an inn where he meets Parson Adams, who becomes his good friend. Then two men travel together and meet with many ridiculous adventures. After overcoming a lot of difficulties, Joseph and Fanny are united. The book turns out quickly a great novel of the comic epic in prose, whose subject is the true ridiculous in human nature. exposed in all its variety as Joseph and the amiable Quixote. Now, Fielding takes his characters through a series of confusing episodes, finally aligning them with their correct partners in an improved social setting, from which the most recalcitrant characters are excluded. The characters, for the most part, have all measured and achieved a greater degree of self knowledge. Thus, the marriage of Fanny to a more experienced Joseph takes place in an ideal setting, the country, and is facilitated by the generosity of an enlightened Mr. Booby. Lady Booby, unchanged and unreformed, returns to London, excluding herself from the society which Fielding has reshaped. Now, let us quickly have a look at the features of Fielding's novels. It is authorial narrative voice. Fielding's method of relating a story is telling the story directly by the author. Satire abounds. Everywhere in Fielding's works, you hear this kind of a satire. Uh, kind of exposing the follies. Now, Fielding believed in the educational function of the novel. The object of his novels is to present a faithful picture of life while sound teaching is woven into their very texture. Now, Fielding is a master of style. His style is easy and familiar, but extremely vivid and vigorous. His sentences are always distinguished by logic and musical rhythm. His command of language is remarkable. So here we end Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews in detail. So when we talk about let us just quickly look into the characterization of the Robinson Crusoe at first. So here, talk about Robinson is a protagonist and the narrator of the novel. He's individualistic, self-reliant. Now, when you happen to read a novel, when you analyze it, first and foremost, look into the characterization of the novel, the form, the narrative technique, and what kind of a genre, whether it is a kind of a picaresque, or is it kind of an adventurous kind of a thing, or a gothic, you have to figure it out. Then coming to the characterization, then the theme, what are the basic themes which are reflecting in the novel? That is very, very important. Now, characterization again. Now, each and every character, whether it might be a minor or a major, a protagonist or an antagonist, everybody has their roles. One should be able to figure out what kind of a nature or an attitude or a kind of a personality traits they carry. So when we talk about Robinson Crusoe, he appears to be an individualistic, self-reliant, adventurous. He continually discounts the good advice and warnings of his parents and others and boldly seeks to make his move. Then coming to a young boy, that is Yuri, who's again another a character of Robinson Crusoe, who is sent with Robinson and on the Turkish pirate captain's fishing boat. He swears loyalty to Robinson after Ismail is pushed overboard and accompanies him along the coast of Africa. Now, there are quite a good number of characters in this, so only the major ones I would like to throw light upon. Friday is again a Caribbean native, one of the savages that Robinson sees on his island. Friday is taken as a prisoner by some cannibals who prepare to eat him on Robinson's island, but he manages to escape. Then he seeks his protection, comes to Robinson Crusoe, and then after he's been named as Friday. Then, moving on to, of course, there are quite a good number of minor characters also in this. Now, well, coming to Joseph Andrews, where Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews, it's like, if you look at it, the theme of it, it's like hypocrisy. Now, like now this Joseph Andrews is full of characters who act one way on the surface, but who are very, I mean, kind of often very different on the inside. Now, this novel is actually a comedy with most of the humor coming from satire, where the characters' flaws are exposed for humor and as a commentary on how people act in the real world. Now, lust versus chastity. Henry Fielding's short novel, this Joseph Andrews, is in part a parody of a longer novel called Pamela or Virtue Rewarded, published by Samuel Richardson just 2 years earlier in 1740. Now, the novel's protagonist, Pamela, faces many hardships and threats to her chastity. Ultimately, however, as the title of the book makes plain, she is rewarded for her virtue. Now, similarly, in this book, here, Joseph Andrews tries to, kind of uh, get away from this kind of an uh, the lust or the chastity towards him. He wants to kind of preserve his chastity, protect from these fending people who ever try to kind of corrupt him or attack him. Now, moving on to the social class. Here it's an important issue for all of the characters in Henry Fielding. As the lawyer Scout notes, the wealthy upper classes in England are above the law, but the law can be bent to do just about anything to the poor. Then additionally, society expects people to marry within their own social classes, and characters are often willing to go to great lengths when given the rare opportunity to improve their own. Now, again, coming to religion and charity. We come across Abraham Adams here. He's a complicated character on one hand, and he can seem hypocritically selfish, pretending to act like a charitable man when he's actually living on the charity of others. He eats and drinks a lot, but rarely has the money to pay his bills. So, and he must rely on loans from the other people. Then again, when we talk about Fanny Goodwill, the beautiful but reserved beloved of Joseph, a milkmaid, believed to be an orphan, she endures many unsuccessful sexual assaults. Then, of course, there are quite a good number of characters in this. We have Thomas Booby, Lady Booby, Mrs. Slipslop, and then we have Pamela Andrews. Then, right. And I want you all to read the books and get familiar with the characterization, especially the theme of it, and also the kind of the techniques, the narrative techniques around which the entire story is woven. And only if you can kind of read it thoroughly will you be able to understand. And I think it's quite clear. The first module or the block, which comprises of 3 units, which talks about the novel, the types of novel, the origin, the background of the novel, and then the various writers of this period, the 18th century, the rise of novel of the 18th century, and the various other writers of this. And then we have 2 eminent writers of this period. We have done the Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, Henry Fielding's Joseph Andrews in detail. And we have also looked into the biography of Daniel Defoe as well as Henry Fielding. Also have had a detailed, kind of a brief summary of Robinson Crusoe and Joseph Andrew. Also, the themes of these both novels. Well, of course, and then we also had a look into the characterization. And any queries, you can ask me tomorrow. We shall meet up again tomorrow in our next class, taking up the second module. So I would request you all to go through The second module, read it. Unless and until you read it, you will not understand, because it's quite a short time, where within 1 hour, taking up all these 3 units, I'm sure it may not be very clear. So I want you people to go through it and try to figure out the points which are not really, which are difficult and you are unable to understand. Kindly raise it in the class where I can help you in explaining them. And here we finished our session today. So thank you very much.